Please welcome back Chief Executive Officer of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation, Mallory Dimmitt.
Well, thank you all for sticking with us and coming back from the break. You are not going to want to miss, like I said, these last two speakers. They are such an inspiration. It's an honor in a room full of my conservation heroes to have the privilege to introduce these two. First, we have the esteemed Clay Henderson, a writer, environmental advocate, legal expert, and passionate voice for Florida's conservation efforts. Clay personally walked the first Florida Wildlife Corridor expedition team in 2012 through the entire Volusia County corridor, and today he's here to walk you through, a little more briefly, chronicling the history of the land conservation of Florida. And then following Clay's insights into our journey thus far, we'll conclude our day with Carlton Moore Jr., a visionary National Geographic explorer, photographer, and conservationist, and producer of the feature film Path of the Panther. Carlton's work captures the beauty of Florida, as you know, beauty of Florida's essence and natural environments like no other. And he's going to take us on a journey that unveils where we are now and sparks our vision for the future. So please prepare to be inspired by these extraordinary conservationists as we wrap up our day.
Hello. There are people out there. Now I can't see anybody out here. Well, where'd you go? That's great. Hey, it's good to be here. I understand I'm Carlton Ward's warm-up act. How you like that? This is exciting. I've seen people here that I haven't seen in years, people I've known for 3 and 4 decades. But maybe what I'm most excited about are all the young people who are here who I have no idea who they are. But it means we're doing something right, bringing more people into this world of conservation. So I take my hat off to all of you. And with that, I'll say I didn't start out with a career in conservation. I had some really, really good leaders, of people that taught me how to do this. And one of them, I bet, is somebody you've never heard of. Walter Boardman happened to retire and move to be one of my neighbors. He was the 20th person to hike the Appalachian Trail, involved in some of the early pioneer efforts at conservation, and was the first executive director of the Nature Conservancy. And he taught me 2 things. The lure of conservation is that one person can make a difference. And then don't waste your time trying to fight something, damn it, buy it. It's the only way to protect. When I wrote my book, it was because some of my dearest friends and mentors had left us recently in the last 5 years, people who really made a difference. If there were Mount Rushmore for environmentalists in Florida, these people would be on it. They taught me and others so much about this effort. Nat Reed, probably responsible for 20 or more state parks, Biscayne National Park, Big Cypress, so many things. George Wilson, 1 million acres, working for both the Nature Conservancy and Conservation Fund, probably personally negotiated the acquisition of 1 million acres. John Hankinson, Water Management District, EPA Director, Talisman Sugar, the headwaters of the Everglades, after Deepwater Horizon helped establish the Gulf Restoration Program. These are giants who are no longer with us. And I just thought it was important to be able to tell the stories of people who are engaged in conservation to take us where we are. We all know why Florida is beautiful, no reason to talk about it, but we can talk about loss and success. When Florida became a state, the government gave us 20 million acres. And before the 20th century dawned, the state, the trustees had given away almost all of it. The good news is that in the last 120 years, we have bought back almost half of that, 11 million acres. Nobody else in the country has done that. You heard Shannon talking about that earlier. No one else has done that. That's what we're celebrating our success, but we're also going to talk about how we finish this. It all started with this guy who is on Mount Rushmore. He executed 10 executive orders, including this one to the start, this one paragraph, no Sharpie, no big press conference, just we're going to protect Pelican Island, became the first national wildlife refuge. He signed 9 other executive orders that protected the first 1 million acres in Florida. That was Teddy Roosevelt. Fast forward a few more years, and it was the ladies' turn. Mayman Jennings had been the first lady of Florida. She got involved in the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs. They convinced the governor and cabinet as trustees to conserve the first lands in Florida and create the first state park, Royal Palm Hammock State Park, now part of the Everglades. They pulled it off, convinced the legislature to give them money to run it, and guess what? They did all of this before they even had the right to vote. Think about that. Fast forward, Gilbert Pearson, he grew up in Archer in Alachua County. He collected eggs. He traded his egg collection for a college degree, became an ornithologist. He became the first employee of the National Audubon Society, became president of National Audubon Society, and one of their first great conservation triumphs was Corkscrew Swamp down in Collier County, which is now not only recognized as a National Historic Landmark, but internationally as a Ramsar wetlands area. We'll keep going quickly. Everglades, I've lost Everglades. Did it come up? Or are we lost? There we go. We could talk about the Everglades all day, but we all know Marjorie Stoneman Douglas' story, the River of Grass, that Ernest Coe had the big vision of 5 million acres. Most people don't know that Franklin Roosevelt spent his time before being sworn in touring the Everglades, learning how to protect it. And then one of the great stories is John Pennekamp. We all know him from the park in the Keys, but he had a lucky streak, and he got invited to a great poker game with legislative leaders. He won the pot, and finally he said, all right, all in. If I win the next hand, you guys have got to fund the purchase of the Everglades. He won, and we owe him a lot. I've been to that cabin, by the way. It should be a historic site. Nat Reed, I mentioned, Claude Kirk, Joe Browder, people who all worked to expand the Everglades into Big Cypress. And then these folks, Lancelot Jones, he lived on an island in Biscayne Bay. It had been targeted for the new city of Islandia. Lloyd Miller was a fisherman who saw what was going to happen. The richest man in the world wanted to build the biggest oil refinery in the world in Biscayne Bay, and they stopped it. And today it's Biscayne National Park. Only would have happened because of their efforts. Shannon talked about our wildlife refuges. 33 in this state is quite remarkable. But the one that's one of the most popular in the whole country, 1 million visitors every year, Dink Darling. He was an editorial cartoonist, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. And he had this idea, we'll create duck stamps to sell to duck hunters, and we will use that money to buy duck habitat. And the rest is history, and we profited so much from it. Let's keep going. Let's see. Here we go. First, now the state gets in the business of actually buying land. 1963, a freshman legislator from Polk County named Lawton Childs proposed the Outdoor Conservation Act to come up with money to buy state parks funded by, you ready for this, a tax on bathing suits. We called it the bikini tax. Didn't go over very well, but it was the start. And Nay Landrum was hired as staff director, and together they built what we all recognize is the best state park system in the country. That's right, give yourselves a hand. One of the great battles in this state was over the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And this is a story of never, never, ever give up. Because even after President Johnson came to Palatka and pushed the plunger and started the first explosion to create the canal, they never stopped fighting it. And eventually it was deauthorized. And now the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway is the largest state park, 110 miles long, and you can see it from space. 1970, the environmental revolution has begun, and we wanted to start passing new laws to protect our wetlands in particular. But the conservatives who controlled much of the legislature said, oh no, here, we'll kill it. We'll kill it because we'll make it contingent upon the voters approving a $200 million bond issue for protecting environmentally endangered lands. They'll never do it, and therefore we'll have no environmental regulation. Guess what? The voters in 1972, by 70% of the vote, passed both of those bond issues and set us on the path that we've been through. We've got a couple of national seashores, and we talked about this connection between art and the environment. Doc Leeper was a nationally known artist who convinced all of her friends, members of Congress, presidents, that this was a stretch of seashore that needed to be protected for all time. And so we recognize that, this connection between art and the environment. Bob Graham, you know this guy, in his administration, Save Our Everglades, Save Our Coast, Save Our Rivers, and the Carl program was established. 1 million acres under his leadership during that period of time, quite extraordinary. Carl program, it was great because it started this scientific basis for looking at land and prioritizing it. And two of the great projects that came out of that were the protection of lands in North Keys, North Key Largo in particular, and the Wekiva River system. Fast forward, Bob Martinez, he appointed the Commission for the Future of Florida. And out of it, they had this great big idea: we need to spend more money to buy land before it's too late. Preservation 2000 was their recommendation. It passed. It was his priority. He made it happen. And it was an incredible program. During this period of time, we protected as much land as we developed. It was a net equal. So it was a great first time we ever turned that corner. Almost 2 million acres preserved, at least a dozen state parks and new state forests. What an incredible deal. One of the things that came out of that was the Florida Communities Trust Program, which was a piece of P2000. Over 300 local parks were established under this program, and just been absolutely fantastic. Oh, that's me from about who knows how many years ago. The genesis of all this was this council that I chaired back in the 90s that created the Environmental Ecological Greenways Network. It was the first thing that pieced all this together and eventually morphed into the thing that we're celebrating today. And out of that, we also said we need to expand P2000, and we need to protect our conservation lands, and we also need to create an independent commission to protect fish and wildlife. And that all happened in 1988. Jeb Bush was elected. He came in on the backs of this 72% of the vote that approved the Conservation Amendment, and the legislature passed the new program, Florida Forever, $300 million a year for 10 years. The big project out of that was Babcock Ranch. The legislature spent an additional $350 million to make that happen. It was quite extraordinary. But of course, and also, out of all of this, local programs got established. We were the first in Volusia. We've come back in '86, in 2000, and 2020. All these 23 counties have approved programs that have totaled over $15 billion. 2014, voters stepped up again, approved Amendment 1. It is the largest conservation finance program ever passed in our country, and will generate $23 billion for conservation. The legislature, a couple of years later, after messing around with it for a few years, finally got into the action. $200 million for Everglades, 50 for Springs, Apopka, and the Wildlife Corridor got funded as a result of all of this kind of effort. $300 million for the corridor, a great jump start to make this happen. And then this year, the legislature finally committed $100 million a year for Florida Forever, and that will make it work. So, you know these guys, one of these follow us up here in a minute, but the great thing was to make all this together in the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act, 18 million acres. We protected about 11 million of that. It's a vision that we're all getting around, which I think is so exciting. But here's the math, and just kind of think about where we are and where we're going. We gave away half of the state, but now we've protected 32% of the state. If we go with the Ecological Greenways map or the Wildlife Corridor map or the Nature Conservancy map, we see that we've got to have at least 40% of the state protected to protect our water and to protect our habitat for going forward in the future. That's the challenge. The challenge is greater because we're still growing at the rate of 1,000 people a day. We're losing 100,000 acres a year, and we need to get back to where we were with P2000, which is where we're protecting as much as we're developing, and we can do that. So that's my lesson. My lesson is that we have done great things here, but we're not finished. But we have the means to do it, not only with keeping the legislature involved and the money coming, but with the people in this room. We've learned two things. That the lure of conservation is that one person can make a difference, every one of you can. Every one of you, too, can be a force of nature to make this happen. And I've just been so thrilled to be a part of it here with you today. Thanks.